The cameras were rolling, the audience was cheering, and then 19-year-old Alex Rodriguez gripped the sides of his wheelchair and spoke with a voice that was becoming more difficult to control with each passing day. When Steve Harvey asked about things you do when time is running out, Alex's response, delivered in the halting, increasingly slurred speech that marked his battle with ALS, made the entire Family Feud studio fall into a silence so profound that the only sound was the hum of the cameras capturing a moment that transcended television. "Tell the people you love how much they mean to you while you still can," Alex had said, each word requiring tremendous effort, as his body betrayed the brilliant mind trapped inside a system that was systematically shutting down. Alex Rodriguez had been living with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis for 18 months, ever since the day after his high school graduation, when what should have been a celebration of his future became the beginning of a countdown he couldn't stop. ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, was stealing his motor functions one by one, starting with his ability to walk and gradually working its way through every muscle group in his body. The doctors had given him 2 to 5 years, but Alex knew that statistics were just numbers, and every day was both a gift and a race against time. The first signs had been subtle, almost dismissible as the normal aches of an active teenager. Alex had been experiencing muscle twitches in his legs during his senior year soccer season, brief fasciculations that he attributed to overtraining and stress. When he began stumbling occasionally during practices, his coach had suggested he see a sports medicine specialist to rule out any structural problems. But the symptoms had persisted and gradually worsened. The diagnosis had come after months of testing, specialist consultations, and the gradual elimination of other possible conditions. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a neurologist at Phoenix General Hospital, had delivered the news with the kind of professional compassion that comes from years of sharing impossible information with families who weren't prepared to receive it. ALS was progressive, incurable, and typically fatal within 3 to 5 years of diagnosis. Alex had been 18 years old, preparing for college, planning his career, believing he had decades of life ahead of him. But Alex had made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. After weeks of rage and despair, he had chosen acceptance over fighting, presence over planning, love over fear. He had gathered his family around their kitchen table one evening and announced that he was going to live with ALS rather than die from it, that he was going to focus on the time he had, rather than the time he was losing. The Rodriguez family had driven 12 hours from Phoenix to Los Angeles, making this trip in a specially modified van that could accommodate Alex's wheelchair and the portable equipment he now needed for basic functions. His parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, had initially hesitated about making the journey, worried about the physical toll on Alex and uncertain whether a game show appearance was the best use of his diminishing energy. But Alex had insisted with the determination that had defined his character since childhood. Family Feud had been Alex's favorite show throughout high school, something he watched every afternoon while doing homework or recovering from the various medical appointments that had become part of his routine even before his diagnosis. He had always been fascinated by the family dynamics, the way Steve Harvey connected with contestants, and the moments when the show transcended entertainment to become something more meaningful. Now, facing his own mortality, Alex saw this appearance as more than just a television opportunity. It was a chance to share a message about cherishing time and relationships while both were still possible. The progression of Alex's ALS had been swift and merciless. He had been an athlete in high school, a star on the soccer team who had received scholarship offers from several colleges. He had been planning to study communications with dreams of becoming a sports broadcaster, using his love of athletics and natural charisma to build a career in media. But those dreams had evaporated the day his doctor delivered the diagnosis that changed everything. ALS attacks the nerve cells that control voluntary muscle movement, gradually paralyzing its victims while leaving their cognitive functions completely intact. Alex's mind remained as sharp as ever, but his body was failing him in incremental, heartbreaking stages. First, he had lost the ability to run, then to walk without assistance, then to walk at all. His speech had begun to slur slightly, and his hands had developed a tremor that made simple tasks increasingly difficult. Yet through it all, Alex had maintained a perspective that inspired everyone who knew him. The application to Family Feud had been submitted by Alex's younger sister, Carmen, who had written a heartfelt letter explaining their family situation and Alex's wish to appear on the show while he was still able to communicate clearly. The producers had been moved by their story and had worked to expedite their appearance, understanding that time was not a luxury the Rodriguez family could afford to waste. During the pre-show preparations, Alex had been articulate and charming despite the obvious physical challenges he faced. The production team had made accommodations for his wheelchair, positioned cameras at appropriate angles, and ensured that microphones could pick up his increasingly quiet voice. Alex had been grateful for their sensitivity while maintaining his determination to participate as normally as possible. The game had been proceeding well. The Rodriguez family was competing against the Thompson family from Oregon, and both sides had been playing with good humor and energy. Alex's parents had provided solid answers, his sister had scored well with responses about teenage life, and his uncle had contributed steady points to their team total. Alex had been positioned at the end of the family podium, where he could participate when he felt able, while not being pressured to perform beyond his physical capabilities. But when it came time for the category Things You Do When Time Is Running Out, and it was Alex's turn at the buzzer, the weight of his situation had made it impossible to treat this as just another game show question. Steve Harvey had approached the podium with his usual warm energy, but something about Alex's expression had made him pause and adjust his tone to something more gentle and attentive. "All right, Alex," Steve had said, moving closer so he could hear Alex's response clearly. "Things you do when time is running out. What comes to mind?" Alex had looked at Steve, then at his family, then back at Steve with eyes that held both sadness and profound clarity. When he spoke, his words came slowly, each one requiring conscious effort as his compromised muscles struggled to form the sounds his mind commanded. "Tell the people you love how much they mean to you while you still can," Alex had managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying across the studio with surprising power. The studio audience had fallen completely silent. Not the comfortable quiet of anticipation, but the profound silence that occurs when people realize they're witnessing something far more significant than entertainment. Steve had moved closer to Alex, instinctively understanding that this young man had something important to share and that the microphone needed to capture every word. "Alex," Steve had said gently, "that's a beautiful answer. Can you tell us more about that?" Alex had nodded, gathering his strength for what he knew might be one of the most important conversations of his life. "I have ALS," Alex had said, each word carefully enunciated despite the increasing difficulty. "My body is shutting down, but my mind is clear. And what I've learned is, time is the most precious thing we have, not because it runs out, but because we usually forget it's limited." Steve had knelt down beside Alex's wheelchair, bringing himself to eye level with remarkable grace and respect. "How long have you been fighting this disease?" Steve had asked. 18 months, Alex had replied, "and I'm not fighting it anymore. I'm living with it. There's a difference. Fighting implies you might win. Living means making the most of what you have, while you have it." The profound wisdom in Alex's words had hit everyone in the studio with unexpected force. Here was a 19-year-old facing his mortality with more grace and insight than most people develop in a lifetime. Steve had looked around the studio, then back at Alex with an expression that mixed admiration with heartbreak. "Alex, what would you want people watching at home to understand about time, about life, about what really matters?" Alex had taken a moment to gather his strength, understanding that this might be his opportunity to share his message with millions of people. "We spend so much time worried about things that don't matter," Alex had said slowly. "Grudges, arguments, petty problems. But when you know your time is limited, you realize that love is the only thing that's actually important. Telling people you care, while they can still hear you, while you can still say it." Alex had looked directly at his parents, his sister, his uncle, each family member receiving the full weight of his attention. "Mom, Dad, Carmen, Uncle Miguel, I need you to know you have given me a beautiful life. Every day with you has been worth more than all the years I won't get to have." The emotional impact of Alex's words had been immediate and overwhelming. His mother had rushed from the family podium to his side, tears streaming down her face as she knelt beside his wheelchair. His father, typically stoic, had been openly weeping. Carmen had wrapped her arms around her brother's shoulders, and Uncle Miguel had placed a protective hand on Alex's back. Steve Harvey had stood up slowly, and when he addressed the studio, his voice carried the weight of someone who had been profoundly moved. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve had announced, "this young man has just given us the most important lesson any of us will ever receive. Alex Rodriguez is teaching us that time isn't about quantity, it's about quality. It's about love. It's about making sure the people who matter to us know how much they matter." Steve had begun removing his suit jacket, But this time, instead of draping it over Alex's shoulders, he had carefully placed it across Alex's lap like a blanket. "Alex," Steve had said, "this jacket has been with me through every show I've ever hosted. It's seen moments of joy, moments of sadness, moments that reminded me why I do what I do. Today it's yours because you've reminded all of us what really matters. Not because of what you're facing, but because of how you're facing it." Alex had looked down at the jacket, then back up at Steve with a smile that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. "Thank you," Alex had said simply, "but I want people to know this isn't about being brave. This is about being grateful. I'm grateful for every breath, every word, every moment I still get to share with people I love." Steve had turned to address the cameras directly. "Alex Rodriguez, ladies and gentlemen, 19 years old, and he understands something that many of us spend a lifetime learning. Time is precious not because we have so much of it, but because we have so little. And the most important thing we can do with that time is love each other completely." The game had resumed, but it had been transformed. Both families had played not for themselves but for Alex, celebrating every point as a victory for life itself, for making the most of every moment, for the courage it takes to face uncertainty with grace and wisdom. Alex had managed to answer one more question during the episode, and his response had become the most memorable moment of the show. When Steve had asked about things that never get old, Alex had looked at his family and said simply, "Love, real love, never gets old. It just..." The studio had erupted in applause that seemed to last forever, but the sound was different from typical game show cheering. It was the sound of people recognizing truth when they heard it, of hearts being touched by wisdom that comes from facing life's hardest truths with courage and grace. The episode had ended with the entire Rodriguez family gathering around Alex, with both competing families joining them in a circle of support, with Steve Harvey standing nearby as a witness to one of the most profound moments in television history. After the cameras stopped rolling, Alex had spent time talking with Steve and other members of the production team, sharing more of his perspective on life, time, and what really matters. His clarity and wisdom had left everyone who met him changed, reminded of priorities they had forgotten, and relationships they had taken for granted. The episode aired 6 weeks later, and became the most watched and most shared Family Feud episode in the show's history. Not because of the game itself, but because of Alex's message about time, love, and making every moment count. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of viewers wrote to share how Alex's words had inspired them to reach out to estranged family members, to express love they had been keeping to themselves, to prioritize relationships over everything else. Alex had kept Steve's jacket as a symbol of the platform he had been given to share his message with the world. More importantly, he had continued to live according to his own wisdom, spending his remaining time focused on love, connection, and helping others understand what really matters in life. Steve Harvey had said that Alex taught him more in one conversation than he had learned in decades of hosting. Alex had shown him that the most powerful moments in television aren't scripted, they're the moments when real people share real truth with real courage. The jacket that Steve had given Alex became a treasured possession, but its real value wasn't in the gesture itself. It was in representing the moment when a young man facing the end of his life chose to use his remaining voice to remind millions of people that love is the only thing that truly matters, and time is only precious when we use it to express that love completely. Alex Rodriguez would lose his battle with ALS 14 months later, but his message lived on through everyone who had heard him that day. He had taught a studio audience, a television host, and millions of viewers that the question isn't how much time we have, it's what we do with the time we're given. And the best thing we can do is love each other completely, express that love openly, and never take for granted the gift of being able to say the words that matter most. Because that's what courage looks like when it faces the ultimate challenge. That's what wisdom sounds like when it comes from someone who understands that every breath is borrowed time. And that's what happens when a 19-year-old boy teaches the world that the most important race isn't against time, it's the race to love completely before our opportunity runs out.